All right, welcome everybody. This is Rachel with America's Service Commissions. Thanks for joining us on this Monday morning, early afternoon, depending on where you're joining us for a special program development webinar. If you haven't done so already, please take a moment to say hi in the chat box with your name and commission, and feel free to share any updates that you'd like. We have some great information for you today about a AmeriCorps program in Wisconsin. Just a quick reminder, I do have everyone's audio lines muted with the exception of our speakers. I have also already hit record, so just know that we are recording, and we will share the recording and related materials on our Basecamp here probably later today or early tomorrow. If you do have any questions or comments throughout the call today, I encourage you to use the chat box. I'll keep an eye on that throughout the call. If you do want to ask a question or provide a comment over the audio line, you can use the raise your hand icon to indicate to me that you'd like to speak, and I'll unmute your audio line and let you know when that is the case. If you are joining us by phone, we do ask that you enter your audio PIN, and that is what will enable me to mute and unmute your audio line. If you are under the audio section on your control panel, make sure you've selected the appropriate audio medium that you are joining us from. So if you are joining us by phone, you'll need to select phone call, and then it will show you the unique audio pin that's been identified for you. You'll press the pound key, enter the number provided, and press pound again, and that will connect you to the audio system. So I'm really excited that we have with us today Shelly Kaiser, who is with Marshfield Clinic, and they host a few different AmeriCorps programs, one of which is the Volunteer Wisconsin AmeriCorps program. So she's going to talk with us a little bit about their program model. This is a topic area, not specifically the Volunteer Wisconsin AmeriCorps program model, but we often ask it lots of questions about what are volunteer programs that are operating in kind of the capacity building space, in the volunteer management space. Get lots of questions about capacity building performance measures. So while I don't expect Shelly is going to necessarily specifically answer all of your questions in those areas, I think this is one program model that may be of interest to many of you that either already have some programs operating in this space, or many of you, I suspect, are interested in developing programs in this space. We also have Jeannie Duffy on the line, who is the Executive Director of Serve Wisconsin, and I've unmuted her line, so she has the ability to kind of chime in with any additional information or context as we go throughout the call today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Shelly.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. As Rachel said, I'm speaking from Wisconsin with Jeannie Duffy. Jeannie's in Madison, our capital. I'm right in the center of the state. It's actually a rural community called Marshfield, and I work at Marshfield Clinic Health System. It seems like kind of an unusual organization to sponsor multiple AmeriCorps programs, but in fact, Marshfield Clinic has had AmeriCorps programs for 20 years now, and we've enrolled our 1,000th member. We've had multiple different programs, and currently we have 3 that are operating, one being Volunteer Wisconsin. I was lucky enough to come on board almost at the get-go of this program, although I wasn't involved in any of the grant writing. Actually, Rachel has a little history with Serve Wisconsin. She worked with Serve Wisconsin maybe about 8, 9 years ago, 10 years ago maybe, and this program was kind of the brainchild of the executive director of Serve Wisconsin at the time, wanting to kind of lead the pack to grow volunteerism in our state of Wisconsin. At that time, I was a volunteer center director in a county working at a United Way, and I heard about this program, and I remember thinking, wow, this sounds too good to be true. Get an AmeriCorps member to help build a volunteer program, recruit new volunteers, think of all of the activities that they could help me with. And so here we are. Lo and behold, I never dreamed that I would be the director of such a program. We've been in operation for about 6 years. So I want to share a little bit about this program with you today. It is a statewide program, the way we have it set up, and our members are placed all across the state in nonprofits and government agencies, and they are tasked to increase the number of volunteers and then to use those volunteers more effectively based on the education that they have received to implement more effective volunteer management practices. So if our nonprofits who are really stressed and working hard to reach their missions, if they have more volunteers who are more effectively utilized, it's just a no-brainer to think that we will have a greater chance of achieving our missions. So that's kind of the whole premise behind this program. Two pieces were really key in the development of the grant. The first was Reimagining Service, which is a report put out in 2009 from the TCC group. And it has very evidence-based data which show that if you utilize volunteers properly, how they can improve your organizational efficiency and effectiveness. And there has not been really a better study, even though it's getting a little old, it's aging here at 2009. We have yet to find one that's quite as powerful as the message there. We also use the Volunteer Reinvented report from CNCS, which was put out in 2007, to help us draft our assessment tool, which we call the Organizational Capacity Assessment. So this is how we will measure the performance levels of the volunteer program in these nonprofits and government agencies within 8 different areas. So we break volunteer cycle into 8 specific functions, and members will focus on those. There's a pre and a post test to evaluate progress. So we currently are using 35 members in Volunteer Wisconsin, and I'm going to show you an example of a question that might be on this organizational capacity assessment. So as I said, there were 8 practice areas, and here is one of them, practice area 7, recognition and volunteer development. The goal is to help retain volunteers at our nonprofits. So there are 22 different questions on this organizational capacity assessment. This is just one. This would be given to the site supervisors before the member starts service. It's a self-assessment of their volunteer program, and they would read the question, and then it's kind of on a Likert scale. They check the answer that they feel their program currently is operating at which level, and you can see that that varies from a very basic level to, the most advanced down at the bottom. So overall value is not determined, so that's, we're not doing anything in that area. 2, on the extreme, the impact of volunteer work and the dollar return on volunteer investment are conveyed through facts and stories to staff in the community. So that would be at an optimal level. So this is a unique tool that we built specifically for use in the program. And we contracted with a recognized expert in the field her name was Bonnie Andrews, who has since retired, but she actually was instrumental in the grant writing as well as the development of this tool and some of the initial training the first several years with our members. And she is certified to do service enterprise training. So she was clearly a good fit to get this program launched successfully. Since then, I have connected with other experts around the state, and more recently with MAVA, the Minnesota Association for Volunteer Administration, and using some of their expertise. So this tool is, I'm willing to share it after the video, is really instrumental in marking, in one of our performance measures, which we'll see. So when the program launched, we had 45 members in 2014, and we have since reduced down to 35 because we had trouble with recruitment. I think Wisconsin is not unique in having struggles with recruitment of members. So it's not that there weren't sufficient applications from host sites, people with interest, but when it came down to actually finding members who could honestly afford the time and the expense and the sacrifice to do a service year, that's where we were having trouble filling our slots. So we are currently operating at 35. All of these members serve as volunteer coordinators. This picture is some of them, which we took at a training. This is their natural looks, I guess. And what did they do? Well, we've talked about this organizational capacity assessment. So they do all sorts of volunteer management cycle activities, but specifically we're asking them to recruit at least 10 new volunteers. And then of those new volunteers, hopefully they will be more long-term, serving a minimum of 15 hours. And the member also has to develop and administer a volunteer satisfaction survey and report on the volunteer satisfaction at the end of their term. It's kind of their report card in a way. The member also has to focus on improving the 3 weakest areas of their current volunteer program. Of course, those will be revealed with that organizational capacity assessment that the host site supervisor completed before they started their service. And those activities are developed together with the member and the supervisor, and maybe some input of other individuals to develop a really specific plan for that organization. So no member does the same thing across the board. They all do things that are going to be the most helpful and meaningful to the site where they are placed. Those are all captured on a member service plan, those customized activities. And that member service plan is kind of a living document. It is submitted to me, the program director, several times during the year. It's updated so that it truly reflects the service of the member. Let's see here. And the last one is each nonprofit customized. Okay, got that one. All right, our host sites. Host sites are recruited through collaboration of many organizations that help us get the word out about Volunteer Wisconsin. So we know we have, oodles of nonprofits that could utilize this program. How do we reach them all? So we started with Volunteer Wisconsin, which was a statewide volunteer matching website. They put out the word, we send them information, and they reach out to their registered agencies. We do the same process with the 18 volunteer centers that are in Wisconsin. We send information and ask them to share it out to their registered agencies. I'm a board member of our State Volunteer Coordinator Association, and so that membership list hears about AmeriCorps. And then, of course, our members, they serve as advocates as well when they are out among others in the community. And then we also are involved in leading trainings across the state. So we have a pretty extensive contact list. Anybody who has participated in one of our trainings or has reached out with a question about AmeriCorps. So they all get bombed in like maybe about February or March about the value of this program and why they might want to consider being part of it and partnering with AmeriCorps. Most host sites request just one member. However, multiple members are permitted on the application. We just ask for a justification because these are ambitious, highly motivated individuals, and it takes a lot of work to keep them busy full time. So we want to make sure that there is enough unique work and that if they have 2 members, the members are doing discrete different activities so that they can be measured. Host sites stay with Volunteer Wisconsin, maybe just a year. It's just enough of a boost to get their volunteer program on track, or to focus on some specific need that they had, and that might be all that they need. Sometimes they hire their member on to continue that work. I see that as great success. And sometimes they're able just to pick up where the member left off, and the host site supervisor or other staff members continue. I think we have only one site that has been with us for all 6 years of our program, but we have many that have been with us for 2, 3, and 4 years. But in theory, the thought is that if you have a full-time member or a half-time member really devoting on one key aspect of your organization, your volunteer program, that with that concentrated effort, unless you are continually launching new programs and new initiatives, at some point you're going to be up to snuff. So you hopefully will grow out of the AmeriCorps program or launch into new areas. Host sites do contribute to our match. We're at 38% in year 6 of our program. This is all clearly communicated in our recruitment process as part of the host site's responsibility, along with providing, besides this cash match, which for next term will be $8,500 for a full-time member or $4,450 for a half-time member. I would just say that in this current host site, or this upcoming term, we had only 2 host sites that said, you know, due to financial reasons, we are unable to continue to host an AmeriCorps member. And with the whole COVID economic impact, I really expected that number to be much, much higher. But I think most of our sites truly see the value, and they're willing to put the monetary amount in, have some skin in the game. 6 years ago, when we launched, our cash match was set at $6,500. So we typically increase it right about $300 each term. Other commitments the host sites need to commit to, besides the monetary resource, is they have to agree to provide a workspace with computer, phone, and adequate internet connection, staff time to supervise and mentor a member, as well as that staff time that we ask them to do AmeriCorps reporting. We also spend a full day with all of our supervisors and do a group training. And we also host a couple webinars throughout the term and require supervisors to attend the webinar, just to really strengthen our relationship with them, to get feedback from them, and then also just to give them some education on what the members say are happening as far as being a good host site, what they need from their supervisors. Here's just a word bubble which shows us the variety of different nonprofits that have participated up to now in Volunteer Wisconsin AmeriCorps. We do have, in our grant, we have written that we do have a priority for volunteer centers, and that's because they work with multiple nonprofits, so have probably greater reach. And we have worked with many of our volunteer centers. Second priority is for any organizations working in a CNCS priority area. And our third priority in recruitment of host sites would be to recruit organizations that are in areas not served by a volunteer center. Our thought is, therefore, they have less access to support and fewer volunteer management resources available to them through their local volunteer centers. All right, because we're a statewide organization, it makes it difficult for us to get together with our members and our supervisors on a real regular basis. We do focus on 2 intensive, long-term, on-site training opportunities The first one being our orientation, the first 5 days of the member's term. And this orientation really sets the tone for the whole year and builds the whole foundation for the next 12 months. So this picture over here on the right shows two of our members, and they are in a leadership hall, which is at a residential camp located in central Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Lions Foundation Camp. So it is a beautiful camp experience. They all stay in cabins with maybe 7 to 10 other AmeriCorps members. We eat in the, well, I'll call it a mess hall, but I think it has a different, the dining hall, I think is what they call it. We eat all our meals together. We work in plenty of recreation time. We're on a lake. We have access to boats, to bikes, to all sorts of sports equipment. So it's a fun experience. We do bonfires, we do team building activities, and then we also do intensive volunteer management training. So we slip that in there too, to give all of the members the same foundation to understand that volunteer management isn't something you have to reinvent. There are best practices. We give them basic forms, tools, and the resources as they reach out and work with our organization to understand where to find answers. I'm available as technical support for them throughout the term as well. So members really feel connected to AmeriCorps and to each other, and then after that week, they return to their host site, get orientation there, and then they start developing that member service plan and getting oriented to being what a volunteer coordinator does. So they'll serve for a number of months, and then our second intensive training period happens in January. Actually, it's 4 days this coming year, and we meet at a water park, actually, hotel, where we have some unusual connections go on their extreme lowest week of the entire year, and we get an incredible rate to be able to bring members to a fun location like that, and give them, again, more AmeriCorps training, reinforcement. But at this point, sometimes things are bubbling up and there's some questions, and so we can dive into more advanced topics. And the members, surprisingly to me, the members after 4 months already feel like they're volunteer coordinator experts, and they really like to share and help each other. So we devise that opportunities for them to get together, and they're housed in housing where they have up to, I think there's up to 9 members in a condominium. And so again, there's team building, they're making meals together. So there's lots of opportunity in these 2 trainings. What we found then is, when this program started, there wasn't a ton of information out there, but today, 6 years after the launch of this, there's quite a lot of high-quality free resources specific to volunteer management that's available. Sites like Volunteer Match, Volunteer Pro, MAVA, Verified Volunteers, CCVA, that's the organization that credentials volunteer administrators, Energize, independent sector, blogs by many of the leaders in the field. They're all available, and they all offer some level of free trainings, and they're quite high quality. And so we're incorporating that training throughout the term. I forward those on regularly, and the members pick and choose, and the supervisors assign as they see fit. Serve Wisconsin also does significant training. They do with members throughout the term. They do a face-to-face kickoff celebration in October, which is a great opportunity to get additional AmeriCorps gear, which our members all love. They have hosted regional spring service projects again, another opportunity for more gear. They've held trainings and offered free trainings, reimbursed for transportation to attend trauma-informed care, transformational leadership, disaster response training, racial justice, and supporting efforts to end racism. That was a Zoom session that was just launched a couple weeks ago with Dr. Alex G. We use experienced trainers. We do contract, like I said, this coming term, we'll be contracting with the Minnesota Association for Volunteer Administrators. I do hold a CVA. I am credentialed in volunteer administration, but quite frankly, somebody needs to be doing all the legwork and the coordinating. It's really hard to be the presenter and do all that piece, although there are parts of it that I get involved and do some training as well. Monthly virtual meetings are scheduled and put in the calendar at the onset, so we connect with our members that way, but we find that the bulk of that hour is spent on covering AmeriCorps requirements, AmeriCorps questions, and so I will schedule additional webinars or virtual sessions with members on specific topics that come up. So it becomes really important for me to have regular warm emails sent out to members. Some of them are just a check-in, and others, many of them are sharing some of these rich resources that I think they may find interesting and helpful in their service. Site visits aren't a requirement. I do like to go visit all new sites so I can picture the member in action at their site, but sometimes based on the location, it doesn't happen as soon as it needs to, but otherwise we don't schedule normally site visits other than when they are requested by the supervisor or by the member. And it's not always for negative reasons, but oftentimes there are issues that they want some consulting for. Volunteer Wisconsin has at the get-go decided that beyond building capacity at the organizations where members are serving, we also want to build capacity throughout the state. So we sponsor trainings that will be useful to our members and supervisors, but we open them all to the public, their webinars, their face-to-face training, and in this environment, there are more webinars on various topics. So here's an example of a flyer that was done, wow, it's an old one from 2015. Supervision. The host site supervisor interacts day to day with the members, so they have the bulk of the supervision responsibilities. We do require all supervisors to put on their calendars and to meet, and we check on this, that they meet face-to-face or virtually in this environment with their members at least weekly. And so the member really day in and day out feels almost like an employee of their host site. And we get that, and that's where our relationship with them through the virtual webinars and the warm emails as a reminder that AmeriCorps is really overarching everything that they do becomes super important. So if host sites have a policy that that members must take this week off for vacation, if there's a shutdown, of course, members have to do that. So they follow all the site's policies unless there is some conflict with a prohibitive activity. We know from surveys that the best indicator for a successful term would be a positive relationship with a supervisor. So not only the member, we do specific training on how can you help your supervisor in their job, but we also do training with the supervisor, what makes a good supervisor. And so we need to invest also in the relationship so the supervisor doesn't just see us as some remote authoritarian figure that they need to occasionally report to, or we slap their hand if they're late on approving a timesheet, so that there is a comfortable relationship and that they feel comfortable picking up the phone or asking questions and involving us in the successes and the challenges of hosting an AmeriCorps member. Let's see. If there are issues, I think typically we don't hear, the supervisor is going to, in the site is going to know about the issues. You don't read about those when you're checking weekly timesheets. So again, if there's a necessary to set up a site meeting, host site meeting, we're happy to do so and discuss how we can get the member turned around for success. And again, that goes with all that relationship building, which is important in all programs. Well, impact. Sometimes it's really hard to measure impact in just a 12-month period. So what I'm sharing here, I know, are some outputs and outcomes, and some of what I think is most important. This program really brings individuals who are not so sure about what national service always is, but when they leave, they've become really strong advocates for national service. They also have a lot of skills that they can use in any position in the nonprofit world, and many of them from this positive experience have decided that they have found their niche to be stay in nonprofit, if not volunteer coordination in the nonprofit area. Recruitment is a focus of the program, and so I'd like to think that if we did have 6 years of AmeriCorps members all across the state of Wisconsin doing this deliberate, mindful, purposeful recruitment, those 12,485 new volunteers that they report on, the majority of those may not have materialized. And so there's an hour number. Notable in this is one of the things that we specifically track is we have set that 15 hours of volunteering as kind of a benchmark, and volunteers who do beyond 15 hours, we call them sustainable, because a typical volunteer might volunteer for a 3-hour shift. If they've come back 5 times, they're probably really identifying with the mission, they're feeling appreciated and valued, and that their work is meaningful. So you've probably gained an ongoing volunteer, which are harder and harder to get these days where people want flexibility and one-stop shops. But notable then, in that total number of volunteers, only 2,418 were considered sustainable volunteers of the over 12,000. Yet those 2,400 volunteers each averaged over 43 hours apiece for a total of 105,000 plus hours. That's 75% of all hours accumulated. So that's pretty cool. And I'm sure those volunteers extend beyond the 1-year service term of the member. So then using that organizational capacity assessment, that pre and post test about the strength of your volunteer program, in the post assessment, there's a specific question asking them to reflect back on their increased level of efficiency, and we define that through CNCS's definitions, and their increased effectiveness due to the activities provided by their Volunteer Wisconsin member. So pretty strong evidence. Over 90% say they are more efficient as an overall as an organization and more effective overall by having sponsored and using a Volunteer Wisconsin AmeriCorps member. And then lastly, we do this outreach, offer education out in the community for both our members to attend, but also anybody else that is seeking that information. And since 2014, we've actually hosted 40 different training events Some of them are 4-hour in-person training, some are 1-hour webinars, but we've reached 1,513 unique nonprofit leaders. These are people who were not involved in AmeriCorps, and we're helping them better engage volunteers. So I think that's pretty impactful. We often ask for feedback from our supervisors periodically, and always at the end of the term. And I didn't look for like the very best, but I just went back to last year's end of the term, and I just grabbed a couple that jumped out at me. So the top one is from the host site supervisor at a health department, and her member helped build strategic connections, increased volunteer involvement, and personally was a valuable resource to her and their organization for best practices on volunteer management. I think that's pretty impactful. The next are excerpts I took from comments from the Cassandra Voss Center at St. Norbert's College, a private college, and that is a special center that focuses on diversity and inclusion. And their member has become a one-stop shop, streamlining the volunteer engagement process, and then helping the volunteers and everyone see the impact that volunteering has made throughout their campus and their community. So just an idea, and the positive comments have been far-reaching for sure, but just sharing a quick glimpse of that. So in response to COVID-19, as you're well aware, CNCS has offered us flexibility to engage members in alternate service that would address an identified COVID need. So we currently have 32 members actively serving, and right now, as I looked in Encore, we have over 3,000 hours, and here's just a checklist of some of the kinds of activities that they have been involved in. Really surprised me on how members really embrace this opportunity to step up and often fill, I think it's in the last little bullet, is filling essential needs when volunteers were afraid to come in. So most of our nonprofits closed their doors for a while, unless they were like a food pantry or another essential service, maybe having to do with housing and other day-to-day basic needs. They really ramped up, and so the calls went out to members to step up, and they were not afraid to come forward and serve. And even though there was an opportunity that perhaps they could coast a little bit and still have a successful term of service, what I found is, despite that flexibility, almost all of our members at the time when COVID had really hit were already halfway done with all of their required hours, and they have continued to stay on track, and almost all of them will reach their goals of 1,700 or 900 hours by the end of the term, because that's the kind of individuals that respond to national service. They like to get things done. I have one member, she's at the United Way in Milwaukee. She has logged 572 COVID response hours alone. She has been serving in a full-time capacity. The United Way has more or less released her from her volunteer coordinator responsibilities to be able to respond to more direct needs. She has been doing childcare. She has been staffing the 211 line, answering COVID calls, and other incidental events that came up. So not all of the members, because there was opportunity for, in this quiet time, for volunteer coordinators to look at their programs and think, when we are at a place where we feel comfortable to invite our volunteers back, what has to take place. And so all sorts of work has had to happen behind the scenes to make our places safe and to make volunteers feel welcome to come back. And one of the most important was just to maintain connections with those volunteers so that when the time is right, they will come back and they won't have fallen into new routines and volunteering is no longer a part of that routine. Okay, mindful of the time. Rachel, nothing yet, right, for questions?
So, Shelley, one question that came in that I think you've kind of addressed, but you may be able to elaborate a little bit was if you place members inside volunteer centers. So if you want to kind of talk a little bit more specifically about maybe that relationship with volunteer centers and how members may be placed with them.
Sure. So they're placed just in the same manner. And sometimes what we find is that the metrics that member can achieve are a little more difficult because the member is not necessarily recruiting volunteers for their host site, they're recruiting for the community. So as we know, the performance measure goals are a team goal. So if a volunteer center is not able to meet the recruitment goal for their organization, they know they far and away have brought lots of volunteers in other places, but they're not able to track that because once they place them somewhere else, they're not tracked, or rarely would they be tracked. But most of our volunteer centers, to keep viable, they run their own volunteer projects and they utilize volunteers to help them be effective. So there's still lots of volunteer management that happens, but sometimes those members are doing lots of partnerships, collaborations, recruiting of employees in corporate groups, and staffing and manning all sorts of events that their volunteer centers run. So the role is a little bit different, but not wholly different, and is completely applicable. But those members are more visible often in our communities, and so when they wear their AmeriCorps gear and they are, working very professionally, they are the ones that often say, "Hey, Shelley, I came up, I met an organization that said, how do I get somebody like you at my organization?" And so they tend to be our best recruiters of future AmeriCorps members and great advocates. I'm not sure if that was what you were asking about, but
yeah, I think Rebecca in Ohio asked that question. I think that does cover it, but I'll let Rebecca chime in if she has more questions on that.
Okay, great. Okay, I just got a couple more slides. Here are my performance measures. The first one is just simply the number of organizations that receive capacity building services. So this is just an output. We have 35 slots. Our target is 26 because we're allowing for the fact that some sites may have multiple members. And we use our host site application for tracking the number of organizations awarded. And we have a selection process to screen and evaluate them. And our second performance measure is G3 3.10, and that is number of organizations that increase their efficiency, effectiveness, and or program reach. So that is an outcome measure. Our target is that 20 of those 26, and that would be determined as measured by that organizational capacity assessment. Positive changes in the level of competence that the supervisor will mark at the end of the term would indicate that there was some improvement in that volunteer management practice area. So in addition to these two performance measures, we also gather data on sustainable volunteers, and we report on those, how many in the hours of those 15 plus houred volunteers that were new recruits, not just inherited and managed by the member, but honest to goodness, new volunteers for the organization. we do require our members to develop, administer, and then to collect and analyze volunteer satisfaction surveys. So that gives them an opportunity to share, to receive input from volunteers and maybe make further recommendations. They do this kind of as a culminating activity at the end of their term. Definitely the member themselves were impactful in the volunteer experience. So it's a report card for the member, for the program, for the organization. And the last item, I think, well, another item that we get and report data on, which is not really included in our performance measure, is also the community education on volunteer management that's offered and the value that the attendees report on that. So in Volunteer Wisconsin, we have a couple really unique but key documents, that being the first, the organizational capacity assessment. Again, I said that's the pre and post self-assessment the supervisor does. We saw a little glimpse of like one item on that. The assessments are almost identical. The post assessment will have an additional page which will get to the increased efficiency and perceived increase in effectiveness that they will report on. Then the member service plan. Here's a little snippet from the member service plan. So the first couple pages will have all sorts of required AmeriCorps activities. But then when we get to those effective practices, where is the organization, where do they really need to improve their volunteer program? Let's say they identified recruiting and marketing to prospective volunteers. So this is one that has been filled in, but except for the first column there, the number 3, that's the only pre-filled. The rest, if the organization had identified that's a low area, then there's different levels of activities. Do they want to work on variety? Do they want to work on messaging? And there's others as well. They pick the ones they want, and then the tasks to accomplish. So they are going to work together with me and their member so that they can utilize their member strengths, develop distinct activities with a deadline, the support team, and then what would success look like. They'll put that in the outcome. So this is, oh gosh, I'm guessing this document is probably around 8 pages maybe when it's all said and done, to allow enough space to document this. And the box at the front indicates at the beginning, the member's like, okay, I get it, this is what I need to do. And the yellow boxes on the far right, at the end of the term before they exit, they need to submit this again. And so this is part of our, one of our tools we use to see if, practices were actually implemented, as well as then the organizational capacity assessment. We have a position description we share that helps sites probably design their own position description, and of course our grant logic model. And so I have shared these documents with Rachel, and she will follow up and attach those in case it would be helpful to look through them. And you're free to borrow and use any of that if this is a program that you see would be advantageous in your state in the future. All right. Jeannie, do you want to chime in? Do you have any general comments of things that maybe you know about Volunteer Wisconsin that I didn't include?
No, I would say we just appreciate it that you are a statewide program that specifically focuses on rural areas, whereas I think we all know it's hard to place a core or group of AmeriCorps members. So by being an intermediary and placing one at host sites in rural communities, that greatly expands the effect and impact of AmeriCorps throughout our state. And also, I personally completely enjoy hearing what each member is doing, how each host site is different. And, I think part of the advantage of being an intermediary is you can have members serving at volunteer centers or environmental organizations, or your members that are working on conservation work up in Ashland. It's like each member does such a unique service activity.
They certainly do. They really do. And I think this, to be a volunteer coordinator is not necessarily an easy entry-level position. It requires a fair amount of administrative, organizational skills and motivation. And I think that when they are finished with their term of service, I think they leave with some really key job skills that can be applicable to the work world in so many different ways. But there's a lot of networking and community building, in particular in working with volunteers. And so I'm not surprised at how many job offers at the end of an AmeriCorps term it leads to, whether it's with their own organization or with partner organizations that they worked with. It's a real great way for them to get a foot in the door as well. So how we can sell all of that because the biggest downfall has been being able to recruit members. We have interest in the program. They can scrape up funds, but sometimes they just have difficulty finding individuals that are willing to commit for a full year. One other little piece that kind of arose that I don't think was in the planning process, but has been kind of a struggle for Volunteer Wisconsin, has been the rule about members are prohibited from fundraising for general operation costs. And we understand that, and we know the reasons why. But when you think about the number of fundraising events that nonprofits engage in, sometimes that has been a stumbling block. We've had to turn away host sites. Sometimes even they had members in hand that they were bringing along with them because the primary focus would have been to run fundraising events, big fundraising events that go into general operations at that nonprofit. So like if you think of the Salvation Army bell ringing, think of all the coordination that's required to make that event happen, the multiple sites and the hundreds of volunteers. And that is the proceeds support the day-to-day operations of Salvation Army. It isn't a special project fundraiser. So we've had to say, gosh, unless there are other volunteer needs, a member won't work. So we've had to be really transparent in our host site recruitment, in our training of host sites so that this doesn't happen. Other organizations like MS Society, where they do, runs and walks all over the state, same deal, So that's been, that's a reality of nonprofits. They need to fundraise. And so that's just one little difficult piece that's good to just keep in the front of your mind, actually, as you are recruiting members and watch carefully on timesheets.
Shelley, one question that came up, and Alexis answered it a little bit in here, was about if host site fees cover your full match, or does Marshfield put in money or fundraise to cover some other costs? And Alexis kind of shared in the chat box that Marshfield puts in some additional money, but they also overmatch each year, so it may not be necessary to hit the match percentage requirements. Is there anything else you would want to add to that?
No, I think Marshfield is uniquely in a position to be able to do some of the things we do because of the match amounts, but because we run 3 programs, and when we run our big training events, even though I'm more interested in AmeriCorps and Volunteer Wisconsin volunteer management training. The other two programs, we can share on the AmeriCorps training and then do our own little program trainings. But there's economy of scales in combining three programs and bringing us all together. And then again, a long history and relationship to be able to offer those sorts of opportunities. And then being a large organization, I mean, we have 10,000 employees, the only health system in our state that reaches every county and tribal nation. With that kind of staff, we have specialized help, like a legal department that can review things, and a marketing department that can offer, in-kind services that don't get charged back to the grant. So it allows us to do some more specialization as well. And yeah, boy, I think I kind of went off track on that question there. Sorry about that.
That's okay, Shelley. I think that helps provide some context to that. You have, because of Marshfield's uniqueness and kind of the way it's set up, there's other things that you're able to bring to the program that maybe other programs couldn't do as easily. So that's good to share. Any other questions from our attendees? I know we're getting close to the end of the hour. Well, I know a couple people have said thanks for sharing. I know Connecticut shared that they just launched a similar program in response to COVID, so this is really helpful.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I don't see any other questions at this time. So I do just want to take a moment to thank Shelley for taking the time to share today. As was mentioned, she provided me all of the materials that she referenced throughout the call, so I will share those and along with the recording from today's webinar on Basecamp here later today. And if you do have questions, you can reach out to Shelley directly or Jeannie, or feel free to reach out to me and I can help connect you as well. With that, I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and please don't hesitate to reach out with questions. So thanks so much to the Wisconsin team for sharing today.
Thank you, Rachel.
Happy to do so. All right, thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.